Thank you once again. We are live now. Thank you for joining us today for what is the second of our 2021 legislative session virtual town hall series. As I said, I am Heather Bagnall, your delegate in District 33, and I do want to thank everyone for your continued commitment to staying safe by practicing physical distancing and safe protocols, wearing those masks, and as we continue to work to more effectively manage the vaccine rollout, which will be the subject of next week's town hall. So I hope you will join us for that. We are now in week 5 of the 2021 session, working on everything from COVID relief packages to police reform, expansion of telehealth and behavioral health care, and equity in so many of our industries. And during this pandemic, our Anne Arundel County Public Schools Board of Education and Superintendent have been working, actively collaborating with the county executive and the other county superintendents across the state of Maryland to address the myriad challenges posed by the changing information coming from the CDC, the plans to transition to hybrid learning and the changing metrics and plans to reopen the school buildings. Here in Anne Arundel County, we have seen a significant rise in the utilization of our crisis intervention teams for interventions for our adult communities, while the utilization for our youth populations is actually reduced while they were not in the school buildings. Across the country, we are having a very robust conversation about systemic racism, police reform, and breaking the school to prison pipeline. I say all this as a backdrop to the conversation we are having tonight, because I think it's important as we look at the bills that are before the General Assembly, we look not only through that equity lens, but also through the lens of local impact so that we really understand what we're talking about at the local level. I am honored to be joined tonight by our esteemed panel, Tamika Perkins, who is the Program Director of Juvenile and Victim Assistance for the Anne Arundel County Police Department, Corporal Michelle Levere, Scott Poyer, Clerk of the Circuit Court, and Julie Hummer, our former board member for the Anne Arundel County Board of Education and former legislative chair for the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. We have a lot of information tonight about how our SROs currently operate in the county, what our existing programs are, and how the bills as proposed would and wouldn't affect our county. So we will attempt to answer all questions, but if we can't get to your question on a call, we will circle back with you to make sure you have answers. If you have a question and have not submitted it in advance, please feel free to put your question in the chat. I also wanted to take a moment to thank my team, Max Pierce and Luke Tudball, who are working hard behind the scenes to once again make me look far more tech savvy than I am. With that, I am honored to introduce Tamika Perkins from the Anne Arundel County Police Department. Ms. Perkins, I truly appreciate you joining us tonight. I appreciate how much time you have given me previously to sort of talk through what, not only what we do here in the county, but what some of these bills look like as drafted, and especially given the significant time constraints we are all under. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
Delegate Bagnall. So also on the call, I have Corporal Michelle Levere. She's my side partner here, in the Juvenile Victim Assistant Unit. And Captain Fred Plitt, who is the commander over the School Resource Unit, as well as the Community Relations Division. He's trying to log in so he can hear, but he's not entirely logged in yet. So he'll be here when we come to the question and answer portion. So just a little bit about the unit as itself. So under the community relations umbrella is the school resource officers, the crisis intervention team, as well as my unit. My unit is responsible for juvenile diversion and processing of cases. We are unique in Anne Arundel County in that we do diversion prior to cases being forwarded over to the Department of Juvenile Services or the court system, and we do it that way to reduce the imprint of a juvenile on a used juvenile record. We know about the collateral consequences, the impact that a juvenile record can have on a youth, and we work really, really hard to limit that, including frontline diversion, which is what I just referenced. And we've also recently started piloting programs to divert youth prior to arrest, linking them with services as well as mentorship and activities and interventions to hold them accountable before a citation or a physical arrest ever occurs. That is something that is unique to Anne Arundel County. It is not something that occurs throughout the rest of the state, and we're really, really proud of that. A couple of other things regarding our attempt to be intentional. Delegate Bagnall referenced the importance of, acknowledging the way that systems make things inequitable. And we're working really, really hard here in Anne Arundel County to address that. So all of our diversion programs are what we call universal screened, which means that it's not dependent on referral. Every case that comes across my desk, which is every juvenile that's charged in Anne Arundel County, is automatically screened for diversion eligibility, aside from race. And we'll talk about the impact that has had on some of our statistics a little bit later on. One thing that I wanted to begin this conversation is by stating the definition of a school resource officer. And I say that because there are surrounding counties in Maryland who utilize both school resource officers as well as school security personnel. And the differences in training as well as role is a little bit different. So I want to make sure that we're all using the same language. In Anne Arundel County, we only have school resource officers, not school security personnel. And so these are defined by the state as a sworn law enforcement officer assigned to a school in accordance with the memorandum of understanding between a local law enforcement agency and a local school system. So these are actually sworn law enforcement. SROs, under the same act that defined them with the definition I just read, are required to have 40 hours of specialized training regarding things like restorative practices, threat assessment, adolescent brain development, trauma, mandated reporting, that kind of things, all specialized SRO training. In Anne Arundel County, we go above and beyond. So in addition to that 40-hour training, we also have all of our SROs are trained in mental health first aid, youth mental health first aid. Most of them are trained in our crisis intervention techniques. All of them will be trained. So the reason why they're not all trained currently is because that is one training that accreditation does not allow us to do virtually. And we've since had new SROs join the team since COVID, and so they're not all currently trained, but that is in the pipeline. That 40-hour crisis intervention training is very specific about working with youth with mental illnesses, as well as developmental delays, traumatic brain injuries, autism spectrum. It is a internationally renowned training. Excuse me. Additionally, our school resource officers get Anne Arundel County specific training with myself at least twice a year. That training discusses things like the school to prison pipeline, bias. This year's topics were specific: the trauma of racism and bias, as well as the traumatic impact of COVID. And we went over action plans and ways that we can be trauma informed when students go back to school, recognizing the trauma that they will be bringing in with them from the past almost a year now. Wow. Along with that specialized SRO training, one thing that we use in defining an SRO and in that training is a 4-part interlocking role. And that is set by the Maryland Association for School Resource Officers. And that role highlights that an SRO job is only partially law enforcement. So ideally, the 4 parts would be law enforcer, educator, meaning that they would be in the classroom discussing things like rights, discussing laws and things like that, an informal counselor, a positive role model, a mentor, a smiling face, as well as linking them in community policing efforts outside of the school. And then the final part is emergency manager. So our SROs work very, very hard on doing things like threat assessment, crime prevention, as well as helping the school prepare for that. So it's 4 parts. And a lot of times we focus a lot on the law enforcement piece of it. But when you ask our SROs what their vision for the program is, What they've told us is that they see their job as very little traditional law enforcement. So yes, safety is important. Making sure that teachers, students, and staff feel safe is 100% an important part of their job. However, mentorship, mentorship, as well as getting to know and building relationships with the students, they see as their primary responsibility. One SRO said he doesn't want the first time he comes into contact with a student to be on their worst day. And so in order for him to successfully de-escalate situations, he needs to have a rapport with them and see them at their good moments. I could tell you countless stories of SROs helping juveniles, students, fill out college applications, writing letters of recommendation, helping them, do all sorts of things. Our SROs are present at football games, graduations, dances. The pictures that I could show you are nameless. They even get wedding invitations. It's the highlight of one of our SROs is that, he got invited to one of his students' wedding. And those are the stories that they will tell you.
And Ms. Perkins,
I'm sorry.
I'm actually going to continue with this conversation because there's a question that came up in the chat, which I think is very pertinent, which is what sort of above and beyond looks like. And so, can you talk about not just the additional training, but the symbiosis between our SROs and our crisis intervention team, which for anyone on this call who doesn't know was just voted the best in the world.
Yes.
Which was really exciting for Anne Arundel County. And I will admit I don't remember the accreditation that did it, but it was like Crisis Intervention International or
ICFS International. ICF. I know the acronym, but I can't.
Sorry, I didn't,
exactly
I didn't mean to throw you. But if you could speak to that symbiosis, because I know that when I spoke with when we had a presentation from Jen Corbett, she actually spoke to that.
Yes.
And that's where I got the information about the fact that crisis intervention has been working with more adult populations, but not with youth populations while they've been out of the school buildings as much.
So can I address a couple of questions in the chat?
Sure, absolutely.
So the question about the training. So that 40-hour training is an annual training. So it's 40 hours a year. The crisis intervention training is an additional 40 hours. The youth mental health first aid is 8 hours, as well as mental health first aid is 8 hours. And then the 16 total. And then the Anne Arundel County specific training, it depends on the needs, but that is an additional 8-ish hours a year. So all of that training is not a one-time thing. It, as programs evolve, as needs evolve, as data evolves, the training evolves with it. And so it's not just, I agree, training does take time. And I personally want our officers to be the highest trained, and we'll talk about the impact that training, when one implemented, had on the schools. So Corporal Levere, you can't hear her because we're trying to remain socially distanced, but what she said is that is all in addition to the regular in-service hours that they are required to have just to be a police officer, and that is 2 days,
3 days
at least 3 days a year. So that is completely that's just in the specialized training in addition to the 3 days. And we will go over the anecdotal data, about SROs that is going to be addressed. As far as diversion, the definition of diversion, there's a couple of different definitions, but for the ones that I'm specifically talking about is frontline diversion efforts, meaning these are kids who have committed an offense that is chargeable, but we, rather than push them into the system, in the juvenile justice system, we stop it at the front line, meaning at the police level, and prevent them from getting a record either with the Department of Juvenile Services or with the circuit court. We build those programs. Those programs are rooted in restorative justice, accountability. And so we discuss things, and we also do a full psychosocial assessment with the youth and the families, meaning we're getting to know the why behind the offense. We ask, how are things going at home, how things are going at school. Is there a history of mental illness? Is there a history of trauma? Were there any changes going on? What led up to this event? We want to get to the why because we feel like that is how you prevent recidivism. And so we meet as a panel of specially trained people. My background is in counseling, and then Corporal Levere also has significant training on the matter. And then sometimes there's an additional person in the panel. We assign consequences for them that they have at least 90 days to complete. Those things can be counseling, drug treatment, community service, projects that are related to their career or to their education, apology letters. It runs the gamut, and we do link it to their interest, because it's not, we don't have people picking up trash on the side of the road. We have people who are engaged in what we call meaningful intervention, because we don't want this to be a defining moment. We want to see what we can learn from them. And we are actually expanding within the department our mentorship efforts, our community service efforts to make those interventions even more meaningful. And that is available to both those in school as well as those who are interacting with patrol officers as well.
And Ms. Perkins, I'm going to give you just a little break because I really appreciate how much information you're giving us. And I'm actually going to turn to Scott Poyer, our clerk of the circuit court, because I saw him nodding, and I know that he's on the other side of this and can speak to the point of diversion and what the impact of that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Delegate Bagnall. As clerk of the circuit court, we get involved if the diversion program doesn't work. So Ms. Perkins and the school resource officers have a very important role. They can get to the juveniles early. And if you can start addressing the behavior early, you've got a much better chance. You've got a much better outcome for both the juvenile and for the chances of recidivism, of them committing other crimes later on. I'm a big believer in the diversion programs because the numbers don't lie. The numbers say that you get a much better outcome. But for the times that it doesn't work, if the juvenile does have repeated run-ins, they can enter the regular system, and that's where they can be sent either to the Department of Juvenile Justice or the circuit court. And I'm from the circuit court. So I'll just cover a couple of basic things. I can answer any questions you've got on juvenile justice. Reader's Digest version, if they come to us, there will be an adjudication. There'll be a hearing, there'll be an adjudication, and then the judge might assign probation with the Department of Juvenile Services. The judge might commit the juvenile, which means basically that they are going to be placed in they're going to be taken out of the home and placed in a appropriate facility for rehabilitation. The judge might also order restitution. But when they enter the regular system, the regular justice system, they are going to have a record. One of the other things many people think is that when you have a juvenile record, that it goes away, that it automatically gets erased when they turn 21. That is not, I see a couple heads shaking, and that's right, that is not the case. A lot of people think that, but that's not the case. Now, juvenile records are confidential while they're still a juvenile, and then they can be sealed, but they never really go away. They can be reopened with a court order, and it can affect them later on in life. So when they start to get a record, Ms. Perkins was talking about the school to jail pipeline, I think is a term that's often used.
And I think it's being redefined even as cradle to prison pipeline.
Yeah, the
outcomes even earlier.
The outcomes and the percentages of success just get worse and worse the further you go. And if they get tried as adults, the outcomes are even worse than that. So a juvenile being tried as an adult has somewhere between a 70 and 90% chance of recidivism. So getting to them early, getting the school resources officers who do an amazing job all the ones that I've met. I was also formerly a reserve police officer with Anne Arundel County, and the school resource officers are very dedicated. They try and do their best to help the kids. So, and they can get to them early, you've got much better outcomes. Anyway, Reader's Digest version. If you've got questions on the juvenile justice system, I'd be happy to answer them.
So Mr. Poyer, I just wanted, because you went over what the recidivism rates were for people who did become involved. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. If we divert them at the front end, they do not have the record that Mr. Poyer was talking about. And even in the pandemic where everything was closed down. And this, keep in mind, this is not just school-based offenses. This would be school-based and patrol. We were able to divert almost 500 youth in 1 year. And that, like, those kids will not have that record associated with any charges. And that is not school-based. That is both school and patrol. But also our recidivism rates are well above 85%, meaning 85% of our juveniles do not have any additional contact with law enforcement within the year. If it is a behavioral health issue and we are able to link them to a crisis intervention team, that success rate goes up into the high 90s. So we are doing it. We are doing our best in Anne Arundel County, and those numbers are unique to us. We've got a lot of special stuff going on, just to add to what Mr. Poyer said.
There's a couple questions in the chat. Sorry, if there's a couple questions in the chat. One from Ms. Kingsley: what are the upper and lower ages of delinquency and status offense jurisdiction? And one from Mr. Swan: can you give examples of diversion programs so we understand what this looks like?
Do you want me to do the age of delinquency? So delinquency is a delinquent act is an act that if it's done by a person under 18 years of age, it would have been a crime if it was committed by an adult. So delinquency 18 and below, but it's serious. A delinquent act is a serious violation. Yeah, and Ms. Perkins, do you want to talk about diversion programs? I think you guys have.
Sure. So we actually, now it's been 3 historically, but we now run 4 youth diversion programs here in the department. The first one is called community conferencing. It is a restorative justice program, which is similar to mediation, where 2 parties who, it could be an assault, a destruction of property or something like that, them and their support system sit down with a trained facilitator to repair the harm, whatever that looks like. So everyone's side is heard, and then they come up with an agreement. So that's one instance of it. And that can be done in situations that do not rise to the legal definition of charging. So if an assault hasn't occurred yet, we would like to use that as crime prevention as well, if we can get in there and talk it out before it gets to that level. The other 2 programs would be our teen court, which is just like it sounds. It is a jury of teens in Anne Arundel County, some who have had prior justice involvement and some who are volunteering, want to understand more of the system. The judges, the only adult role there is myself, who does the paperwork, and the judge. And we work with our circuit court as well as our office of the state's attorney to get real judges. They hear the case, the juvenile essentially testifies in court, the teens ask questions, and then the teens give the consequences. Once again, those consequences range from community service to counseling to urine screens to essays, projects, that kind of stuff. So for example, we had a incident where a juvenile was writing some racially motivated things on a desk, and he was charged with destruction of property. And a part of his consequences assigned by the teens was he had to go to the Holocaust Museum, and where you are assigned a person's story, and he had to give a presentation and a project about that, in addition to community service and counseling. So that's this kind of consequences for that. Then our joins program is for your more complex cases. that was pre-COVID. So it's not necessarily complex cases now, because we've transitioned everything because it's easier to social distance with the joints program. But it would be a panel, Corporal Levere and myself, as well as other people help fill in with us. And that is when we get into a full assessment with the family, and then we can link them with resources. We typically stay with those youth longer. Anyone who we have to refer to CIT would go through our joints program, and then we give similar consequences. Once again, any of those 3 programs, you do not have a record from that as long as you complete and do not get in any additional trouble. Our latest program, though, is currently in the pilot phase, is our START program, which is a pre-arrest or pre-citation diversion program. Similar consequences to the Teen Court or Joints program, similar intake to the Joints program, except it all happens prior to citation and prior to charging. It is a much quicker process. We are working with our districts patrol-wise to get those kids linked as soon as the officer responds on scene. The pre-arrest diversion program will also follow youth longer, so just under 6 months, and they will be working on community service projects with officers in their community. So for example, if you are in Eastern District, you will be working on community service projects in Eastern District, and that is based on restorative justice principle. We have piloted that program for 1 month. We're in the second month of piloting. Within the first month, that impacted juvenile charging rates in patrol by 50% reduction. And of course, we don't have recidivism rates, but because they're going to be using the same principles as other programs, we anticipate that it's going to be a very successful program. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much. And I want to take a moment and I want to turn to Ms. Hummer, because you've sort of been here for the evolution of the SROs statewide. That this, as I understand it, this was part of the Safe to Learn Act from 2018, which was a response to the Parkland shooting. And that, the General Assembly, this was before I was part of the General Assembly, but I tried to do my due diligence and understand sort of the evolution of these programs in the state. That when we passed the Safe to Learn Act, it established funding and mandates for SROs and for training. That 40 hours, I believe, is part of that legislation. That was sort of the standard that the General Assembly called on. And I bring that up because one of the bills that is in the General Assembly is around that original legislation and redirecting that funding. So if you wouldn't mind, can you speak a little bit to sort of where that started and where we are now?
Yes. So Anne Arundel has had SROs for many, many years, going back well before that, the school safety bills from a couple of years ago, but that mandated it on a larger scale throughout the state, because some school systems didn't have a security component there. And after the Parkland shooting and the Great Mills shooting, that was a big concern. But I think when we talk about SROs being there to stop school shootings, that security is definitely part of the picture. But Ms. Perkins said it very well. Our SROs primarily see themselves not as the law enforcers in that regard, as more of the relationship piece. And the school resource officer definition defines that it's really the relationship and how to build those to do that diversion from the beginning to help divert the kids, and also to find out and stop things before they happen, building those relationships to come through. So there have been a lot of changes through the SROs through that Safe to Learn Act. It's now become a much more across the state, a more consistent training program for the entire state. And the Anne Arundel County SRO division was one of the leaders in developing that training to have out there. It's considered a model for how they would be. Within Anne Arundel County, our SROs are chosen very carefully. Not just any police officer can be an SRO. In fact, I remember talking to one, he said, I tried for years to be an SRO and my captain kept telling me I wasn't ready yet. And he needed me to get the proper training and understand the kids before he would put me in there. So they are very well, carefully chosen. They love their students. One of the bills that you have coming before you is one that Anne Arundel County has supported for every year that it's come forward. And this year, the Maryland Association of Boards of Ed is supporting, which is one that says that the SROs are not to intervene in schools when it's a school discipline issue. And that's an important one that to have, because we don't want children in schools to view the police as they're policing them, monitoring their every move. They shouldn't be called if they're just late for class in the hallway or something like that. That should be the school administration. So I think that bill is an important one that's coming through this year to really further define that we want the police to be there, the SROs to be there to building relationships, but not as the hall monitor. They're there for, their role is greater than that, and it diminishes their ability to build those relationships if they're called in for a student back talking in class or something. I've never heard of that happening in Anne Arundel County, but we all have heard stories throughout the country of where SROs have not really fulfilled that role. And so that's part of the legislation coming through that I think will actually just strengthen the SRO program and hopefully put people's minds at ease of why the SROs are there and what they're doing within the buildings. So.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it because I one of the reasons I wanted to have this town hall tonight is so that we really understood what we were talking about and what these bills do and don't do in Anne Arundel County. And I know that HB 522, which just put in the chat, is the bill you were referring to, which is about prohibited conduct. And from my conversations with Ms. Perkins, she said that this is already their best practices, and that this would actually be a bill that would unify some of the ways that SROs operate, especially since, as I understand it, not every county utilize SROs as part of their arm of law enforcement. Now, we had a conversation earlier today about some of what was in these bills that Anne Arundel County is supporting and is already sort of actively looking to do. And I think one of the things that came up was around the uniforms.
Yes.
And also around your conversations with, because you said you have a student advisory board, is that correct?
Yes. Let me respond to the chat. So Ms. Britt, I do not have specific data on the types of incidents that SROs have responded to. I do know that the overwhelming majority of them would be second-degree assaults and affrays, but I do not have that data with me right here. But while we're talking about data, in the last, so even accounting for COVID closures, even when you prorate it, one thing I want you guys to know is Anne Arundel County did not wait for legislative changes to be proactive about addressing school-based charging. So we modified our training regimen. And this is even before accounting for youth diverted. In 1 year, we saw an approximately 22% decrease in school-based charging because of the efforts that we put in. And we're still trying to disaggregate that data by repeat offenders because that can kind of alter the data. But we are also the pre-arrest diversion program that we talked about being available to patrol. We're working to see how we can fit that in with schools to that 50% reduction that we're seeing in patrol. We would love to bring that to the schools, because if we can address the charging aspect of it, then then the SROs are free up to have more mentorship and more, get in the classroom, or the things that that we've already talked about as being their role. Delegate Bagnall, you were referencing our conversation about Senate Bill 245, which essentially says that a school resource officer would be prohibited from entering the building without administrator permission to respond to an emergency. Also in that bill, it would require SROs to wear civilian clothing, prohibit them from participating in routine school discipline, as well as they would be required to conceal their firearms. So one thing that we mentioned is when I talk about this bill with SROs, none of them are arguing that they need to be involved in routine school discipline. Like we said, they actually do not want to be a part of routine discipline, just similar to what Ms. Hummer said. As far as we had this conversation with our youth advisory council, it's about 20 students from around Anne Arundel County, and we're getting their input and they are helping to advise and shape some of our programs and policies. And what they said, is they were not, none of them, when we did an anonymous poll, was in support of the bill or in interested in removing SROs. What they did say is they were interested in uniform changes. So one thing that we're working on as a department is SROs will be switching to, or will be allowed to switch to soft uniforms. So the uniform that Corporal Levere has on right now, the blue polo with the embroidered badge, and you can't see it, but she also has khaki cargo pants, very similar to our CIT uniforms. That is what the SRO uniform will switch to. Now, full disclosure, because of officer safety and wellness and the wear and tear caused by a gun belt that's worn around your hips, officers are allowed to wear an outer carrier, which is literally a vest that can go over top of a uniform. And it has your I feel like I'm explaining this wrong. So the things that would go on a belt go on the vest. And so it does change the style of the uniform. However, we're working with our, while it's my understanding that right now that is allowed, they would be allowed to wear that. We're working with them to discuss the way that can present in a school. And that is a conversation that we will be having with them. So that's something that's being addressed. The other things that the students asked for would be a requirement that SROs introduce themselves to students and explain their role beginnings of the school year. All of that will be conveyed to the SROs to make sure that if they're not already doing that, that's something that they add. The students wanted more SRO classroom time to explain, their rights, explain things like the Constitution, explain the laws, explain, what are you doing in a traffic stop? That kind of stuff. And then they wanted to ensure that an officer is a good fit for the program. And they wanted more transparency about the interview process. That is something that we're working with, having someone civilian on the interview panel, someone who has a background, whether it be myself, whether it be a representative from the school system. Those are all conversations that are being had. Students want the publicizing of the complaint process if they do have an issue with an SRO, to increase that transparency, so that we're working on how we would implement that. And then finally, the programming and training to reduce the impact of charging. That is something that we really, like I said, hope to have addressed with the pre-arrest diversion program. But with the changes in training and the intentional emphasis on reducing charging and the constant continual training on school to prison pipeline and the impact we've already seen, like I said, an over 20% decrease. And we anticipate, as we continue that and get into a flow and continue to build those relationships with administrators as well, we're confident that those numbers will continue to go down. I see the question about students with disabilities on our youth advisory committee. Not with visible disabilities, but that is not a question. We are in the infancy stages of that. We have our core group of 20, but right now what we're currently doing is going through the strategic planning process of whose voice is not represented and how do we get their voices captured between either our youth advisory council or the county executive's youth advisory council. That is something that we're working on. Admittedly, being in a virtual environment and having COVID has hindered that, but we're looking at once, we can get back in the physical environment, how can we grow that to get the underrepresented voices? So thank you for that question.
Heather?
Thank you, because I know it's always important to look at who's not in the room and make sure that you're addressing that. And Ms. Hummer, you had a response as well.
I do. I have a couple of questions for Ms. Perkins. So your youth advisory council is separate from the county executive's youth
Yes.
advisory. So it's two separate ones. And I think that was a great question about, are there children with disabilities? I heard you say earlier that some of the training that the SROs go through is specifically working, for instance, with some of our people with autism who respond differently. And I think that would be a wonderful addition to that youth panel, is to have some students that do have some challenges sometimes with social interaction, that could share their input on there. So I love hearing that you're looking to how you can increase that. And I think that was a great question to make sure that that's a voice that's being heard.
So
Yeah, if we could have neurodiversity, that would be really great on that panel.
So we're looking at ways that we can actually branch out our community engagement with youth. This specific group that I was referencing, we started this specific program to focus on underrepresented voices in the wake of the social unrest that happened. So this one is specifically focused on race and equity and social justice as it relates to the criminal justice system. However, what we've seen, and of course, I think we all know this on this call, that there's overlap and there's intersections. And so once we, like I said, we're in our second month going into our third, and we have really hit the ground running quicker than I ever imagined. And so now that we have our core group, the plan is to break out into smaller groups and let them blossom out. So thank you for that. I will add that to our agenda for our next meeting. So thank you for that.
And Ms. Perkins, I know that you've spoken some to the mental health training, and Ms. Shore, I know that you got into the call a little late, so I'll give you an opportunity to address it again. But I did want to just ask one question, because I know this is sort of the elephant in the room, the reality of those numbers that we saw in 2017 and 2018. And the concerns that some of our communities of color, particularly parents of children, our brown and Black children, have about the graying of the lines, between discipline and law enforcement. And you and I spoke about that earlier, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that, because I know that Anne Arundel County is making efforts, but it is a very real concern for a lot of parents.
So I have a lot of transparency with my SROs, and I call them my SROs because I work so closely with them. We do not deny the reality of the school to prison pipeline. The school to prison pipeline, just for those of you who are unfamiliar, I'm going to read the textbook definition, is policies and practices that push our nation's schools children, especially are most at risk, out of the classrooms and into the juvenile and criminal justice system. The school to prison pipeline includes exclusionary discipline, which would be suspensions and expulsions, and it also includes school-based charging. And that is a reality that if you ask me what my career goal is, it's to dismantle that pipeline. And so we have those very real conversations with our SROs. When you look at the numbers from 2017 and 2018, what you will notice is we were being proactive about it, and we were implementing some of this training that we've talked about then gradually. But in 2017-18, and then the year after that, with the Safe to Learn Act, we added about 10 plus SROs. And so what that causes, the numbers did spike, but it spiked because of the addition of it spiked because of the additional SROs, and we were trying to there were some growing pains attached to it. And we immediately addressed it. And so those of us, even during that school year, those of us who had been training with us and we had that intentional focus, their numbers were going down. Some of your bigger high schools were going down. And we see them going down as well as the 22% decrease. We see them going down as well. So our efforts are working and we are being intentional about addressing those concerns. One thing I will also say is in the switch to universal screening about 5 years ago for our diversion programs, we did that to be intentionally equitable because what best practices, or excuse me, what the evidence and research shows at the national level is that referral-based diversion efforts actually make racial and ethnic disparities worse. And so that was why we changed that. And we're cutting edge with that. I want to be intentionally equitable in all of our programs. And so in our diversion efforts, what you'll see is the racial makeup of the diverted kids or the youth referred to diversion matches the youth charge. So what that means is it's working, our diversion efforts are working to reduce those racial and ethnic disparities. Why that's promising is when we switch to the pre-arrest diversion, that means that is also going to be universal and is also going to intentionally address those racial and ethnic disparities. And so, for example, our diversion program historically have over 60% minority youth participants. And that is not because, we pick them that way. It's because, universal screening, if it fits, that's how you're chosen. It's not referral based. Everyone has an equal shot. And we're very proud of the way that we use our programs to address the concerns of our Black and Brown students. And when we switch over to pre-arrest, that's something that we're going to continue to be intentional about, but not denying that it is a real concern.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that. And I did want to sort of circle back to SB 245, because I think that is the one bill that is raising a lot of concerns. There's some good things in it but there are some things that would drastically impact how our SROs operate in Anne Arundel County. And my question is, how do you think that would impact our diversion programs, our engagement programs, our community programs? What would that look like if it were to pass as drafted? And as I've said before, I don't know what it will look like coming out of committee. But we want to know what that looks like.
So if you have a school resource officer who is prohibited from being in the building, you lose the ability to build relationships. You lose the ability to prevent certain things. You lose the ability to the early intervention, the early warning that Mr. Poyer spoke about. You lose that ability. If you lose your SROs, which is essentially what it sounds like Senate Bill 245 is attempting to do, then you would have either school security personnel or patrol officers responding to handle the school-based events, because the issues are not going to go away. You would have people coming in. So it would slow down response times, which causes a safety issue. And we've had several, high profile events in Anne Arundel County over the past couple of years where response time and having the SRO in the building really was helpful. Also, if you have patrol officers, depending on shift, it may not be the same patrol officer every time. And so there's not going to be that relationship. There's not going to be that understanding of the kids, of the school makeup that would otherwise be there with a school resource officer. And so the relationships are the key to our youth diversion efforts, and they become even more important in the pre-arrest diversion. And so that would significantly hinder that. Additionally, patrol officers do not have the specialized training that enable an SRO to do their job that the legislative fought so hard to add. One thing that everyone has been fighting for years was that 40-hour comprehensive training to make sure that SROs have the resources that they need. And those patrol officers they're not going to have that. And so that's going to impact it. One thing I've also heard said is that, why can it not be a school security officer? Well, what we've learned from surrounding counties who have investigated that, who do have school security, is that their charging rates were disproportionately coming from their school security personnel, not their SRO who received that personalized screening. And so they deemed that that was not not the best option for their county, and that's based on the data.
And I know we had a few folks that weren't here at the beginning of the Zoom. So if you can speak a little bit about that training again, and particularly the mental health aspect of it, because I know there's a lot of interest about and concern about what that specialized training looks like.
Can you repeat that question for me?
Just if you can speak to the training again. I know there were some folks that weren't here in the beginning when you were talking about it, and
Yes.
particularly the mental health aspect of it.
So annually, our SROs receive 40 hours of specialized training. That is an approved curriculum by the Maryland Center for School Safety that goes over things like restorative justice, restorative practices, the impact of a juvenile record, school to prison pipeline, adolescent brain development, mentorship in the classroom is all part of that 40-hour annual training. Additionally, in Anne Arundel County, our officers have 8 hours of mental health first aid training, which is basically how to triage mental health issues, as well as youth mental health first aid, which brings it down to adolescent interaction. Additionally, most of our SROs have the 40-hour crisis intervention training, which goes over things like youth who are on the autism spectrum, traumatic brain injury. They get another specialized juvenile unit. It goes over things like trauma, adverse childhood experiences, depression. It's a whole ever-evolving curriculum that is internationally renowned. And then they also get specialized Anne Arundel County specific training from me, which focused this time about trauma of racism, trauma of COVID, and how we can have trauma-informed practices. But that changes based on the need of the county, what the data says, as well as what best practices we can bring back to the county.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to circle back, Ms. Hummer, because we are talking about bills. We're talking about specific bills that are in the General Assembly. And there's a couple of bills we haven't really talked about. One of which is HB 496, which is it's the funding. It's the funding around the Safe to Learn Act and moving that funding into mental health resources. And for folks who maybe didn't catch this on the call, my understanding is because our SROs are part of our law enforcement, they're not a separate entity, that we don't use that Safe to Learn funding for our SROs. So in essence, we would actually be bringing more money into the county, but potentially it might impact other counties in a different way. And if you wouldn't mind speaking to that, I just want to make sure that I have my information correct.
So you're correct. There's $10 million designated for the different counties to be used specifically for SROs or law enforcement coverage. Because in Anne Arundel County, it's the police force and they're all police officers. They are paid for out of the police department budget, not the school's budget. That is not the case in many of the counties. Many of the counties have to pay directly for the SROs. And for our small counties, losing that funding could be really challenging for them. Their budgets are very small as it is, and to come up with that could endanger that to have in there. I do not want to say I don't know definitively if the county receives any of that money to help pay for the SROs. I can't speak to that because I don't know the county funding, but I don't believe they do. But when this money, this $10 million would be moved to a separate fund from the school safety cabinet would issue this $10 million to school system for grants for different mental health resources. So in actuality, if this bill were to go through, it could open up for Anne Arundel County Public Schools to be able to receive more funding for mental health things, because they would be able to apply for those grants. However, you do have to think of other small school systems that this could really impact their school safety that would come through. So it's not the $10 million transfer. There's a lot of talk that would remove SROs from schools. That's not true. That's just would remove one source of state funding that has applied to them, but it would be reallocated for mental health resources. My belief is let's do both. They're both good. SROs are a very valuable mental health piece in our schools. They have the extensive trauma-informed care training, restorative practices. They're there to build relationships. They're a vital piece. Let's have them and additional mental health resources. I think we can never have too many. I did want to ask Ms. Perkins a question while I'm here. Ms. Perkins, so when we saw that there were the high data a couple of years ago for many of our high schools about citations in schools, but the citations, that is what your diversion program would work with those students, so that those citations do not become a record if they successfully permit. So they just, let's say there were 500 citations, that doesn't mean 500 students now have a record.
Correct. And so if a citation is written, all juveniles who are charged in Anne Arundel County come to either me or Corporal Levere's desk. We are a one-stop shop. From here, we read every single report. We check for priors. If they are a first or second time offender, we are reviewing their case to see does it meet the criteria for diversion, because there are certain offenses that we cannot divert legally. Is the victim willing to allow them to be diverted? And then we will refer them to one of the programs that we spoke about earlier. If they go to one of those programs and are successfully diverted, there is no record attached with that. We even work with the Naval Academy, because if you go through our programs, you can still get top secret clearance because there is no record. The record only becomes attached once it leaves our office. And so what we've done is we've had so much success with doing our diversion that way, that now we want to back it up and say, okay, now let's see if we can do this before the charge. So either way, there's no record, but recognizing the impact on some students of just the paper that is a citation. That's another thing I want to make sure that we all are aware. When we say arrest or pre-arrest, for our language, that also means pre-citation. So for juveniles, you can either get a paper citation and then release to your parents or to your guardian, or you can actually have what's called a physical arrest, which would be what most adults think of. You're placed in handcuffs and then you're leaving. We have very few physical arrests. The majority of what we think of, what we term arrests, are actually paper citations. But either way, we recognize that can leave an impact on the child. And so whether they have a record from the citation or not, we're now trying to push it back to reduce the stigma in addition to affecting the record. So yes, ma'am.
And one more question. You said that there are some offenses that you cannot do diversion for.
Yes.
What would be some examples of that?
So the one that comes to mind that comes up the most often in a school setting would be a sex offense 4. A sex offense 4 could be something as let's say, unwanted contact to the buttocks. There was a game that went around in the schools a couple of years ago that certainly was not funny. But the kids, we had to do some education with the kids to let them know, hey, this is not okay. That we had conversations with consent. There was a great help at the state's attorney's office who went in and did education there. But sex offense 4 is, for example, something that we cannot divert because it's a sex offense. We do have some latitude. So the way that our codes are written is we have a list of offenses that can automatically be referred. And then there's something that says other offenses with chain of command approval. Those are cases that we need to have more eyes on it, because there has to be special circumstances for us to be able to take it. But sex offenses, even sex offense 4 is one that we cannot take.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Hummer, for those questions.
I'm learning so much. Ms. Perkins is just a font of good information about everything that's going on. And so
And I know that we're coming up on the last sort of 20 minutes of our time. And I did want to make sure that one, I addressed all the bills that are in the General Assembly, because there's one more that we haven't talked about, which is HB 171. It's around data collection and disaggregated i.e. de-identified information for discipline related data, which seems like it just seems like a good thing to have, as we're trying to move forward and really look at programs and their success, and making sure that we are breaking that cradle to prison pipeline. Having accurate data seems like something we want. Ms. Perkins, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that bill, Ms. Hummer.
So I have not had an opportunity to look at that bill, but what I can say is that part of being intentional for our programs is data. I am a data person. Everything should, in my opinion, should be evidence-based. And if you can't be evidence-based, you should be working towards that. So part of that for us is we do disaggregate our data. We look for trends by district. We look for trends by gender. We look for trends by race. So all of our data can be disaggregated by race and is disaggregated by race, gender, and district on a monthly basis. So that I'm not sure exactly what the details of the bill are, but that is something that we are already doing and have been doing for at least the last 3 years.
And I feel like the intention of the bill is very good. Again, we never know what it's going to look like by the time it comes out of committee. But it seems like this is something that going forward would be useful as we are developing these programs. And I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but I wanted to give our panelists all an opportunity to sort of close us out. If there's anything you haven't been able to say, if there's anyone who still has a question that you haven't been answered, again, if we don't get an opportunity to answer it tonight, we will circle back. And I know that this is just the beginning of a much longer conversation, but I really, really appreciate all of you being on this call tonight to give us, a broader perspective on not only what we do, but what this looks like here in Anne Arundel County. Okay, and we have a question in the chat. At what points in the disciplinary process are parents contacted? Can students be questioned without parent present?
So I cannot answer that right now because I want to verify, I want to fact check my information because we've had some changes and I know that there is pending legislation on that as well. And I just want to verify that. So Ms. Shore, I just put my contact information, and everybody on the call, I just put both my my email as well as my phone number on there. Ms. Shore, if you could give me your information, I will verify that and I will contact you if that's okay. I just don't want to misspeak.
And if you can loop me in as well, and I'll share that out to everyone who is on this call tonight.
I believe Delegate Pena-Melnick has some legislation in around that. And so there may be some changes that are coming based on that legislation about where in the pipeline. So that's pending right now.
And that legislation is the one that I was referencing.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I first compared it, I actually put what our rules and regs are side by side with the legislation, but I just want to verify. I think most of it matched up, but I just wanted to verify.
To have so
Yes, question.
Let's see. Oh, I'm
Decriminalizing
Decriminalizing.
disturbances. I don't think any of us can speak to that tonight. We'll have to circle back on that one. Because it wasn't on the radar for the SRO discussion, but I appreciate you raising that bill. Because again, sometimes I don't see it until it gets out of committee because it's not my committee. So I will we'll pull that bill, take a look at it, and
ma'am, if you pose the question, can you also give me some contact information, and I will do my best to find some information and see what information I have on that. My apologies.
Checking this stuff.
It's just, oh,
so I wanted to give everyone an opportunity. Corporal Levere, I know we haven't talked to you a lot. You've been speaking through Ms. Perkins, but is there anything we missed? Anything that you wanted to say tonight? Oh, we can't hear you.
here. We can't hear.
Sorry, she's reading me what the bill is. My apologies.
okay.
I forgot she was on camera. Sorry, because if we can get an answer, she's reading me what the bill is. My apologies.
Okay. All right. Well, Clerk of the Circuit Court, Scott Poyer, any final thoughts?
Oh, sure. I would just, I did like what Ms. Hummer said, that school resource officers are a great resource, and so are the school counselors. We need them both. And so, yeah, I'd like to echo that too. And Ms. Perkins is a wealth of information. She's just such a wonderful asset for the entire county. Can't say enough good things about the work that they all do. Because I'll go back to what I said before, if you can intervene earlier, the outcomes are so much better. They're almost a mirror image. The juveniles that have the early intervention have so much better outcomes than the ones that go through the entire system. And basically, if they do end up, the worst case scenario, a juvenile tried as an adult that goes to adult prison, it's like a finishing school for further felonies. It's early intervention makes such a difference. It really makes such a difference. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And Ms. Hummer, any final thoughts?
Yes, I just, I know I, as a parent, feel better when I hear Ms. Perkins talking about everything that they're doing. I think that, as Scott said, all the early intervention is so important. The relationships are so important, but also hearing that we're all very aware of the lasting harm that can come from students who get into the justice system too young and that we don't have the proper resources and supports there to help guide them elsewhere. I think that I loved hearing what the Youth Advisory Council's recommendations were, because that's exactly what I hear from other parents as well, is that they don't want SROs removed, but they do want there to be close scrutiny, appropriate training, making sure that their roles are defined, not as the disciplinarians, but to be there for the relationships and build. One of my favorite stories from SROs, and one thing that's hard to quantify, is how many things the SROs help prevent, how many students they help guide off the path or events that happen. And one of my favorites is, it's a sad story, but it was something that could have been much worse. A couple of years ago, one of our students in Anne Arundel County was involved in a serious incident outside of school hours. I believe it was a murder, and he was a fugitive. And in a fugitive situation can go badly very quickly. Kids are scared and things can happen, and that is when tragedies happen. And he was wanted, and he had a relationship with his SRO, and he contacted his SRO and arranged to turn himself into the SRO because that was someone he trusted. And that was a way a potential tragedy was averted, and it was a way that he could be brought in and dealt with in a way that was safer for everyone involved. And I think that that is a real telling thing about the role that SROs can take in helping to keep our children safe moving forward. But I believe, like with everything that we do with any of our children and anything in law enforcement, it needs to be constantly evaluated and checked all the time to make sure that we are doing best practices, that we're doing appropriate training, that we have the right people in the job. And so that needs to be a continuous conversation between school system, legislators, police department, everyone working together. So thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Perkins, I'm gonna ask you to close this out, but there's a question in the chat which actually speaks to what we were discussing earlier, and that graying of the lines. And it's a great question, as we're talking about the role of student resource officers, of school resource officers. Why is it important that they be law enforcement? Like how is that impacting how is that impacting our county?
So one of the things that I didn't mention when we start talking about our pre-arrest diversion, one of the things I didn't mention is a clarification in writing of roles of what to kind of make that line a little less gray. I will also say that in the county, one thing that we truly believe in is the power of civilian sworn allyships. So of course you will see within the crisis intervention team, you have Lieutenant Steve Thomas, who is sworn law enforcement, and you have Jen Corbin, who is a mental health professional. In my unit, of course, you see me, who is a civilian with a background in mental health. And it has specialized training. I'm not a clinician, but I was a licensed social worker. And then you have my side partner who is sworn law enforcement. And part of that has to do with the legalities around emergency evaluations. Part of it is for safety. So your SROs are also there, as Ms. Hummer said, in a crime prevention capacity, a threat assessment capacity, in ways that require being sworn for information sharing with they have access to have some of those conversations. We also feel that school resource officers are an essential part of community policing, as we mentioned a little bit earlier. The threat assessment, the safety, the response time in those situations, in those worst moments, that, in my opinion, is part of the reason why it's sworn law enforcement. But once again, as we talked about it, when we switched to or not when we switched, but when we saw other jurisdictions who either have switched to school security or who have that sworn or sworn law enforcement officer and school security, what we saw is that school security, it didn't have the intended impact of reducing the charges because the charging was disproportionately school security. And so that is just a consideration. But the safety impact of it is important. I will say, just like Ms. Hummer stated, both are important. Mental health specialists, no one would deny the importance of clinicians. But I can speak, for the team that we have. I could not do what Corporal Levere did as sworn law enforcement. We had to clearly define her roles. While there is significant overlap, I cannot do certain things. And I don't know that she would admit it, but there are certain things that I can do that she can't do. And so the collaboration is very important, especially in those worst case scenarios that unfortunately do arise. So I think it's one of those things where we do need to look at the data, and I will never say that we don't need more mental health resources anywhere. Even as robust as we have in Anne Arundel County, we could certainly all do more. And one thing about our SROs, yes, they are not mental health experts, but they are resource experts, meaning that they might not be able to do it, but they know how to get a hold of someone at Mobile Crisis, or they know how to get a hold of someone in CIT, and they can get there, and they know how to keep everybody safe in the moment and then bring those resources in. And that's something that we work really, really hard to do. When I talked about the umbrella of the community relations department here in the county, just for those who were not on the call, one captain And then you have school resource officers, the crisis intervention team, and then my unit. And so what that allows for is the exchange of ideas, the conversation to happen, and the early intervention to happen seamlessly. And we do all meet. I probably talk to Lieutenant Steve Thomas daily, as well as the captain daily, but it's because that's the way that we're able to do it seamlessly. If it's not sworn law enforcement, some of that would be impacted just because of communication.
Thank you very much. I think we're probably going to leave it there because we're coming up on time.
If more questions come up, please
by all means, reach out to my office, reach out to Ms. Perkins. Because we
want to be a resource. We want to get this right. And I know that this is not the end of the conversation. It's just the very beginning. So thank you all very much. We will be having another town hall next week on the vaccine rollout. And I'm going to turn this over to my partner to close this out.
So thanks again. I just want to say thank you to all our fabulous panelists, especially Delegate Bagnall for hosting. Also, of course, Julie Hummer, Tamika Perkins, thank you so much. Corporal Levere, Mr. Poyer, always a pleasure. As the delegate has said, we're going to be having another town hall, just like this one, next week, which will be about COVID-19 and the vaccine rollout in Maryland, and specifically in Anne Arundel County. How we can try to work through all of those things. Obviously, it's not the easiest system to work. I would like to thank everybody, of course, that all of you all and the guests that joined us, all the questions that were submitted. And of course, everybody who's watching live on YouTube. Thank you all for being here. It's really important to continue that conversation. And if there are any questions that you all have, or, after we've finished this, you think, oh, I should have asked that. That happens to me all the time. So you're not alone. You can email the delegate's office. I put it in the chat. It's heather.bagnall@house.state.md.us. So please feel free to send any questions there. We're going to share more details about next week's town hall on social media, and we look forward to seeing you all then. This recording will also be available on YouTube, and we'll share the link to on our social media as well, in case you feel like you'd like to share it. And please do feel free to share it with everybody who you think might be interested, friends, neighbors, other community leaders. And I would also like to thank the other representatives of our community organizations that are here with us on the call. Other than that, please stay safe in the winter weather, take care of yourselves and others, and we'll see you soon.